Hello, I'm Brian Mulligan, and I'm here to show you how this Autodesk graphics template that you've downloaded was built and put together so that you can customize it for your own needs. Let's take a look at it first. Now this effect was basically built using a node inside of ConnectFX called Stylize. Stylize allows you to basically give different paint and sketch and comic book looks to your video. But you can also use it on typefaces as well to kind of, create some interesting look out of basic fonts in the text tool. Now each of these scenes was basically built upon the same template in and of itself, so you can copy it as many times as you want to create as many scenes as you want for your own use. So if you look at the timeline, you basically have the first scene here. The second scene layers on top of it. It basically does a key on top using an alpha channel. It basically continues on with different video and different type that you can customize. Let's take a look at our first segment. If we look at it closely, you can see that basically there are some animated mats that reveal different stylized versions of our clip. Clip starts out normal, paper texture comes in, there's a little bit of inky sketch effect that happens on the video, and then there's a separate layer where it fills in even more. And actually a third where we even get our final amount of detail. You also then have the text effects that comes in, and then a few accent paint elements, along with a camera move. So just by layering some animated mats with some different stylized versions of our image, we can create a pretty interesting reveal. Let's see how this is done in this clip. Clip is basically just a ConnectFX adjustment segment. So if we enter the effect, you can see that the schematic is kind of involved, and there's a lot of elements being used and reused through different nodes. The bulk of the effect is then layered inside of action for the final composite. So let's take a look at these elements one at a time. So our first group here is the image that's being used in the effect. If we click on our note, you can see that this is a resized 4K image. The effect is designed for 1080 HD, so you can replace or remove the image and resize as needed. You can simply replace the image easily enough just by dragging and dropping a clip from your media library. If I take this clip, I can drag and drop and replace it. The effect then, in action, will update accordingly. So let's reset this back to our original image, and I'll show you step by step what's happening. Alright, now that we're back, let's hide our media library, give us some more room, and go to 2-up view. So we can look at our schematic and our result. Like I said, we start out with our first clean image. I then put it through a resize node to get it to HD. That then is feeding into a mux node. Now a mux node basically is a way to organize your schematic and use one source and easily pipe it to multiple other sources. So we take our original image coming through this mux node and we pipe it into a stylized node. Now the Stylized Node basically allows you to apply different paint and sketch and ink looks to your video. Now you can pretty much create a lot of endless looks with this, but sometimes it's easier just to start with a preset and dial it in from there. Over here on the right in the presets area, if you click on the arrow, you can see that basically there are numerous comic book, paint, print, sketch, ink, and marker effects that you can apply to your video. I chose Sketch 04 for this example. Once the effect was loaded, the properties for this effect are down here in this menu. Now this menu basically operates kind of like a Photoshop layered process in which you can build up the ink and paint elements to create the exact look that you want. If you start down at the bottom where the effect begins, I chose to turn off some of the elements on the preset to get the look that I wanted. The first one being this paper color. which was a brown sepia tone, but I didn't really want this color right now. I just wanted it to be black and white so I had more control over it later. So I chose to hide this individual effect just by clicking the eye, much like you would in Photoshop. You can then start looking at all the other individual layers and see what effect they have on the video. So you can see just by turning different layers on and off what it's doing. You can choose different blend operations of each of these layers to affect the ones beneath. When you click on an effect, its menu will show up to the right. Here you can adjust exactly what this effect is doing to the image. By adjusting the various values in the menuing, you can create or add more or less of the effect. To achieve the look that you're going for. So I like what I have here in the first Stylized node to generate my effect. But I wanted to layer up this effect. So I duplicated the Stylized node. I adjusted some of the settings for it further to get a more simpler, high contrast version of it that I can also use. These two nodes will be combined into action and layered up to create the effect. Along with stylizing the video, I also needed to create some animated mats. So included with this template is this particle cloud video clip that I created outside of Smoke. But I took it into action and made 4 instances of it. I then used these instances to create this almost full screen smoky matte. These subdivisions that you see are actually on each layer. I used the extended by cubics on some of these images to kind of pull the video exactly into place to fill up what I needed. I took this matte effect and created a CFX clip, which I then used here so that I could pre-render it to help speed up my renders overall for this effect. You can take any set of nodes, make it a CFX clip, which then gives it all the properties of the clips, allowing you to pre-render and then also use it as a clip. I'll delete this since I've already created one. Down here, I also did the same thing, using the same clip, but in a different action node, created a different type of matte effect, one where it grew on from different points to fill the screen. This too, I created into a ConnectFX clip that I could pre-render to save myself some time. Also included in this template is this inky cloud effect as a video clip to help further give me that inky look. So I've taken these 3 basic matte elements and combined them even further to create exactly the mattes that I needed to achieve my look. I've taken 2 of these effects and put them into a time warp. And in this case, slowed it down because the original animation was too fast. I then took it into a 2D histogram node and actually got rid of some of the blacks and made it more of a solid white cloud. This other transition effect I put into a time warp to where I did a speed ramp on it to where the effect starts out at 0 but then ramps all the way up to 500 to bring the effect on faster. That's one of the advantages of creating a CFX clip, is that you can run it through a time warp because now it actually is a clip. So these are combined in this blending comp node to where the bottom matte actually reveals the more full white inky clouds. The output of this blending comp is then fed into this logic op, where we take the other matte effect that we created and simply do a subtraction on it, so that the effect starts out in black, and with the subtraction effect, it's just revealed along the edges. I then combine that effect with the other full white one into another logic op node that will basically then bring on the whole effect but protect the edges. This is really the final matte that will be used on several of our media layers. Over here, we have a few other video clips included with the template that are just animated paint splashes and streaks. These are just being used as mattes again, and the fill for them is being generated up here, where if you click on the note, it will say this is for the background and fill elements and for the extra paint elements. So this set of nodes is where we've created sort of our paper background texture. Basically start out with a colored frame of black just to feed into the stylized nodes that demand an input. In this first stylized node, we can see we have our paper texture. This effect basically only has one layer. It's set to a canvas. And then I've chosen the type of canvas style that I want. This one I chose leather, but I could easily have chosen drawing paper or crumpled paper. I then just set the highlight and shadow color to get the sepia look that we were going for. I also scaled the image up a little bit and added a little rotation to the image. This other stylized node is basically the same thing with just a different paper texture, something a little bit more subtle. So all of these nodes are going to be combined inside of Action. Our video source, our mattes, and our full screen paper textures generated with the stylized node, along with these elements. This last group down here is our type. So just through a text node, we've created some type with a nice font style to match the look. I've run that into a stereo mux node, which is just a group set of mux nodes that I'm using to simply freeze this text effect so that I only have to render one frame. It's a nice little trick to help speed up your renders. I then used another stylized node on this text. The stylized node also generates a matte, which will help give our text that hand-drawn feel. I've taken the main result of the stylized node, run it through a color corrector, and I've taken the matte, inverted it, and then put it through this matte edge where I've used shrink to actually do a reveal for the text. So with a high shrink value, the letters are gone, and when I reverse it back to a low shrink value, they sort of have this reveal, which is a nice way to sort of bring on text for this effect. I then run those through a pixel spread just to fatten up the fill video to get better edging on my text. So all of these elements, including our extra accent clips, are being fed into Action. If we take a look at our Action schematic, you can see that this is where we're layering up our images. The first image layer It's just the background that we created through the use of the Stylized node and the paper texture that it generates. If I hide it, it's just the background. There's then a separate little accent layer that's layered in here just to give the paper texture a little bit more life. You can see when I hide that on and off what it's doing. These four images here that are grouped together under one axis are the different stylized treatments that we're using for our video. If we start all the way back at the beginning, we have our main image, and then using one of the mattes coming out of the Logic Op, as the effect builds, the image is being eaten away by the matte and revealing the background underneath. Also underneath, the same matte is revealing one of the stylized effects for this clip. As the effect builds, the one image will go completely away, and we're left with the initial light sketch effect for the image. Another image is starting to come on, and you can see that down here in the media list, I've actually slipped the matte to adjust when the effect happens. Right now, it's happening at -27 frames from the beginning of the effect. So as the effect progresses, those mattes that we generated start to reveal more detail into our sketch image. The third image that you see starts to come on, also using the same matte element, and reveals the final detail of our image. This image is actually an unstylized version of the image with just a color correction on it that turns it into a sepia tone. With the matte, it's generated and sort of adds a bit more detail from the original image to help make the effect clearer. Now, there are two source matte nodes underneath these images. So with these source mattes and their axis controls, you can actually manipulate the matte from the image separately to really fine-tune the effect. In this instance, I can take the axis effect for this source matte, which is referencing media layer number 5, which is this image up here. And by manipulating the axis, I can actually adjust how much of this effect and where it appears on the image. So if I just want more detail in the center, I can change the scale of this, and I get more detail on this part of the image and less on the edges. So you can fine-tune this to your own liking. The other elements in our schematic are our type elements in extra graphics. Our type comes on, and our other elements are simply being filled by the stylized texture nodes and just using those mattes. I've also added a little color correct to create the design that I wanted. Once the effect is built, I simply animated a camera in the scene that starts out normal, and by the end has an animation that you can also adjust. I've sort of built these elements with a little bit of Z-depth just to give some parallax to the layers as the camera moves. So if I exit back out of Connect Effects, back out onto the timeline, we have our first effect that we can render. Now the other effects were built basically the same way, just with different animations and different types. I simply copied this clip up and placed it on the next layer. If we go inside this Connect Effects, you can see that this schematic is built the same way. Starting with our video, once again, just drag and drop a clip on here to replace it. This image also has a 2D transform node associated with it, just to rotate it back in proper alignment. The same resize is added to bring it into HD. If your clip is already HD, you can cut this link here and just connect your clip directly into this Mux node. But from the Mux node, the same effects happen. The stylized nodes are the same, with slight adjustments just to bring out the detail I needed. These matte clips are all the same. We did change the text in the text node, and everything's being combined again inside of Action. And we simply created a different camera animation and positioning for our elements. Now back on the timeline, this clip actually keys over the clip underneath, and it does that because this is a CFX-A clip, which means it has an alpha channel. The alpha channel is built down here. Once again, we started out with our same elements. In this case, I put it into a time warp to speed it up. I then placed that into an action so that I could bring it on and fill up the screen with several instances of this cloud. I also once again used the Inky clouds, placed them into a time warp to slow them down, again into a 2D histogram to cloud it up and make it more white. I took my action output, ran it through a time warp to actually speed it up even more, because the effect wasn't fast enough as a transition. All of these elements are then placed in the blend and comp with a solid white frame. So when they're combined, you have several layers that are revealing. And then eventually go to full white as the transparency is keyframed. Down here. So I made a Connect Effects clip out of this by simply selecting the nodes, right-clicking, creating the Connect Effects clip, and then piping it into my Connect Effects result node. I did this so that I could once again right-click and render it, so I only had to render this matte once, since there was a lot going on with the time warps and blending. I'll delete this clip since I already have one, and if I look at the note attached to here, basically tells you that this is the matte transition for the CFX-A clip. So since this clip has an alpha channel, on the timeline there's an axis connection to it, which allows that alpha channel to key, and when it's placed over the clip underneath, as the matte reveals, you reveal the new image. This is an easy way in Smoke to kind of create complex transitions just by using some simple animated mattes. The other elements are built basically the same with different camera moves and different graphic placements. So if you look at the other elements of this template, you have our sketch main effect that we're working on right now. There's a separate panel that's just a simple title effect. And then there's a lower third element which also matches the design. So once again, it's really easy to change your video by simply going into the layer, going into Connect Effects, finding your video clip, and dragging and dropping the clip you want on top. And again, everything will update when you exit back out on the timeline. So thanks for checking out this Connect Effects graphics template from Autodesk.